in the last section, we started putting together our mock client instance right here. Again, this function right here is going to be invoked anytime our code tries to create a AJAX or a HTTP request. So whatever we return from this function will be what our code thinks that it's getting back from that outside API. So what you and I have to do inside of here is return some amount of JSON data. So I'm going to create a fake list of IDs. So this is going to be like a fake list that we're going to later on expect gets returned from calling the fetch top IDs function. So I'm going to create a new list of IDs. I'll put in like 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm going to turn that into JSON data by calling json.encode. Now, if we try to return this, we're going to get an error message. So if you hover over the error, you'll notice that we are currently trying to return something of type string, because that's what JSON is. It is a string. But it is expected that from this function, you and I are going to return a future that contains a response. So even though, all this stuff might seem like it's really easy to craft some data that gets returned, well, this function has very specific requirements. We have to return a response object that contains the data that we want to send back to our API. So this response object right here is a part of the HTTP package. So this represents a real response that is going to be directly handed back to our code back inside of the real fetch top IDs function. The first argument to the response constructor is the JSON that we want to be inside the response. And then the second argument to it is going to be the status code of the request, or excuse me, of the response. And so we're going to enter in a status code of 200 to indicate that, hey, everything is successful and everything's good. Now, even when we add in a response right here, you'll notice that we still have this kind of red error message right here. So we are now returning a response, but we need to return a future that's going to resolve with a response. And to solve this, all we have to do is mark this function as async, like so. Okay, so that creates the mock client. Now, here's kind of the twist here. Just creating the mock client doesn't do anything. This creates a mock client, and it just kind of sits there. This thing does not automatically intercept requests that are made. We have to actually go back to the news API provider, the instance that we had created, which was technically right here, and we're going to replace the client that we had initialized on here with the fake client or the mock client that we just put together. So back inside of our test, when we create the mock client, I'm going to say news API.client equals mock client. So now hopefully it makes a little bit more sense as to why we made use of the client as an instance variable on here rather than directly using the get function. It's because we wanted to make use of the mock client class, and we wanted to specifically overwrite the client instance on our news provider API instance variable. So now, after setting all that stuff up, we can now attempt to call the fetch top IDs function and get back the list of IDs that that function is supposed to retrieve from the API. So for this, I'm going to create a new variable called IDs, and then I'll call news API dot fetch top IDs. Oops, capital I. Now this is a function that's going to return a future. Remember, a future is like a JavaScript promise. Essentially, we have to wait for this thing to be resolved, even though we're making use of the mock client. So even though we're making use of the mock client, the request is kind of instantaneous, but to make sure that our code doesn't break by instantly returning a value, because remember, back over here, we do have the await keyword. So whenever we call fetch top IDs right here, even though it does instantaneously complete the request, we still are going to pretend as though it takes some amount of time. And so I'm going to put in the await keyword in front of it. Now you'll notice that I'm getting an error message right there. It's because we are making use of await inside of a function that is not marked as async. So I'm going to make sure that I mark this thing as async like so. Okay, so now last thing we have to do, we're going to look at this list of IDs and we're going to write out an expectation to make sure that it is equal to the list of IDs that we had kind of faked to come back from the API. So I'll say expect IDs to be equal to 1, 2, 3, and 4, like so. And that's it. So let's save this file. I'll flip back over to my command line. I'll do a Flutter test. And then we're going to wait the 12 seconds. Hopefully for you, it's like 3 to 6 seconds or so. I could always delete the widget test file and it would go a little bit faster, but whatever, we'll get through it. And there we go, test pass. Awesome. Okay, so that's pretty much it for testing an asynchronous function that makes a network request. Let's take a quick pause. And to be honest with you, I know it might be a little bit laborious. I would like to write a test around fetch item right here as well. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll very quickly put together a test for this function as well. So I'll see you in just a minute.